There are stories that refuse to die. In the quiet hours between dream and waking, memory sometimes speaks in another voice. Tonight, we follow one such voice, a boy from Louisiana who claimed to remember the smoke and steel of a war he never fought. His name was James Leininger. Barely 2 years old, he spoke of corsair planes and flaming seas, and of friends long buried in the Pacific Ocean. He called himself James III. What began as a child's nightmare became one of the most studied cases of supposed reincarnation in modern history. Welcome to Phantom Lure, where fact and folklore intertwine, and the past leans in close enough for us to hear its breath. I'm your host, Falcon, and if you enjoy walking the edge between science and the unknown, remember to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the stories the world tries to forget. And a note before we begin, every account you'll hear tonight is drawn from extensive research and documented interviews. But as with all human memory, truth may flicker at the edges. This is the James Leininger case, the pilot who remembered. The first sound is not a gunshot or a propeller's whine. It is a child waking and a small mouth shaping fire and disaster. The house is safe, the crib latticed with white slats, the air warm with the Louisiana summer, and yet the night opens like a hangar door, and through it comes the smell of oil and salt, and the scream of something broken. A boy called James begins to cry, and the words tumble in a cadence too old for him. Plane on fire, little man can't get out. His parents, Bruce and Andrea, do what parents do. They gather him up, murmur soothing words, check the windows and the closet while reminding him the world is an ordinary place. But the nightmares return, again with fire and water. A cockpit that won't open, and a phrase that repeats like a plane circling the field, unable to land. He uses the word pilot, and then a name that means nothing to a toddler, Natoma. He mentions a friend by the name of Jack Larson, and when day breaks he points at toy planes while claiming he was hit and crashed in the water. Sometimes his voice carries the solemnity of witness, as if he's returned from the scene and has to tell the tale of what he's experienced. No one in the house has ever asked for such stories, yet they keep coming, skittering to the kitchen table, the backseat of the car, and the edge of sleep like small moths drawn to a single candle flame. What do you do with a word like Natoma when it falls from a child's mouth? You test it against the world, of course. You hold it up to the light to see if it shines with the ring marks of reality. One evening, Bruce sits at the family computer and types the name into a search bar. And there it was, the name, found in the fibers of reality. USS Natoma Bay, CVE-62. An escort carrier of the United States Navy. He prints what he finds. The footer on the document preserves the moment like a fossil in amber. 27th of August, 2000. At this time, young James is only 28 months old. With that paper on the kitchen counter, coincidence starts to grow teeth. The ship exists, not in fairy tale, but in the naval history of the United States, in photographs and texts of campaigns. And if ships are real, then so are the rosters and action reports with a particular sadness attached to them. The parents begin to search even deeper. They learn of Composite Squadron 81 or VC-81, of pilots who flew FM-2 Wildcats from the Natoma Bay during the long grind of the Pacific War. Names are not shy in the archives. They wait in lists, on log sheets, in scrawled margins that still carry the pressure of the hand that wrote them. James McCready Houston Jr. is one of them, a Navy pilot, 21 years old. On March 3, 1945, during operations in the waters near Iwo Jima, his fighter, is struck. It falls to the sea and Houston is lost. This is not the world of children. It is the ledger of war. But the ledger is not mute. The aircraft action report for that day plots the path of two aeroplanes like stitches across a torn sky. On the chart, one name appears beside Houston as a wingman on a flight run. The name is Jack Larson. At the Leininger home, a toddler speaks this name without context, without roster or reunion, and does not know why it matters. He says Jack Larson the way a person calls to someone just up ahead in the dark. The parents don't run to mysticism, they walk steadily. They phone veterans, they attend reunions, they collect scraps of evidence for verification like wreckage cleaned from a beach. They keep their eyes open to be sure they are not sleepwalking. The more they learn, the more the map seems to line up. Natoma as the ship, Larson as a fellow pilot, and the open ocean as a grave. In time, the story leaves the house. It finds a wider audience in the bright and restless world of television. ABC News tells it in 2004, then again in 2005. The camera loves the part where the boy points at planes and seems to know them, almost as much as it loves the moment when facts peep through the veil of fairy tale. A real ship, a real young man, ending in fire and sea. But cameras don't settle arguments. They amplify the tap of a question against the glass of reality. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies has been following such taps for decades, collecting and analyzing what they call cases of the reincarnation type, or CORT for short, where young children make statements about prior lives that are later matched to deceased individuals. In 2016, child psychiatrist Jim B. Tucker published a peer-reviewed account of the James Leininger case. He lays out 3 criteria that gives a case like this its strength. Firstly, early statements. Secondly, documentation prior to identifying the previous personality. And third, a subsequent verification in those records. In his paper, Tucker argues that James's case exhibits precisely those features. The article is sober in tone, careful with claims, attentive to a particular datum. Houston is the only pilot from the Natoma Bay confirmed killed during the Iwo Jima operation. A lone soul that would be easy to overlook if you weren't searching for the one light blown out by a specific gust. If a child repeatedly describes a single watery death from a particular time, the facts we find has a way of leaning towards that truth. And yet, science is a convoy with its own escort. It requires critics to guard against romance and error. In 2021, philosopher Michael Sideth publishes a long, granular re-examination of the case in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. He goes line by line through timelines, interviews, and claims. His conclusion is not gentle. The evidential value is compromised by uncertain chronology, parental testimony as the main conduit, and ordinary information pathways that could plausibly account for the boy's statements once the family began investigating. He warns about the gravitational pull of confirmation bias, how we weight the hits and forget the misses. He points, in particular, to the category of so-called B items, statements that individuals say were recorded before the pilot was identified, and questions how securely dated and independently witnessed they really are. If many details emerged after the parents already knew the ship, the squadron, and the context, then the case may be as much about story construction as it is about survival of memory. The debate does not end there, though. In 2022, Tucker replies in the same journal, reaffirming that some statements were indeed recorded before any identification, citing, among other anchors, that August 27, 2000 printout of the Natoma Bay page that followed James's mention of Natoma. He argues that 10 early items predate the Houston identification and that aspects like the Larson name and the crash into water retain their force. Others have attempted to reconstruct a more secure timeline from correspondences and documents, arguing that the critical correspondences were not late additions but early markers that found their targets only after years of searching. When the sea disputes with the wind, the waves grow taller. The result here is a case whose heart remains visible but fog-shrouded. On one side stands printed footers, action report charts, and a pilot's death quietly logged in official lists. On the other stands the wild garden of memory, parental love, fear for a suffering child, the human tendency to search for meaning in driftwood. The truth likely passes through both. What then do we make of the nightmares themselves? They are, in fact, the rawest material in this story. No ship names, no naval jargon, only a recurring scene of fire and entrapment. A child's psyche can snag on images from television, overheard stories, a museum diorama glimpsed out of the corner of an eye. But it can also snag onto nothing at all, inventing the abyss from its own shape. Here, the parents insist they had no special interests in aviation, that the imagery did not come from them, that James woke with terror as if to some old summons. As they investigated, the nightmares receded. The boy's relation to airplanes grew gentler, more curious than haunted, as if the act of naming and locating the death, pinning the wreckage to a chart, had performed a rite of release. In this, the case mirrors the long practice of grief. To speak of the lost is to calm their footsteps in the hall. Whether one calls it reincarnation or resolution, narrative is the old sacrament. The ship itself becomes a character. In the Naval History and Heritage Commands record, USS Natoma Bay is described in the dry poetry of tonnage and sortie. A Casablanca-class escort carrier called to Luzon, to Leyte Gulf, to Okinawa, and to the waters around Iwo Jima. A campaign fought island by island, like steps into a burning house. The ship's Composite Squadron 81, with its stubborn little Wildcats, was built for the abrasion of close support and anti-ship strikes. The kind of duty that pulls pilots down among the traces where names are learned quickly, or never at all. On March 3, 1945, an action report turns human lives into vectors. Planes lift from the deck and descend into the coordinates of war. The chart that shows Larson flying alongside Houston is a kind of secular icon. 2 tracks angled like tuning forks toward a single chord. That the name Larson emerged from a toddler without any obvious source links the living and the dead by a filament thinner than hair, yet stronger than steel. Or so some will say. Others will caution how easily a name can slip into a household through a documentary, a veteran's newsletter, a stray email, a filament spun by a spider you never saw. It is worth pausing here to consider evidential standards. Science is a custodian of doubt. It asks not merely for stories that fit, but for controls against ordinary causes. In cases like this, proponents strengthen their hand with contemporaneous documentation, dated notes, audio and video with timestamps, third-party witnesses. The Leininger case, as we have it, offers some such anchors. The printouts dates, the Navy's own materials, media timelines, but it also catches gaps. Notes that were reportedly thrown away after the family's book was written. Reliance on retrospective testimony for key statements. A balanced reading sees both shape and shadow. The shape is a sequence of seemingly specific correspondences. Natoma, Larson, a watery crash in the Iwo Jima context, and a child's obsessive drawings of a plane. The inscription, James III, on those drawings, which the family later took to mean a third in a line of James's, Houston Jr. being the second. The shadow is a questioned chronology, and with it the possibility that the search itself fed details back into the child's world, gently, lovingly, and entirely without malice. Meanwhile, the public receives the story in headlines and whispers, if not of reincarnation, then of some prowessness at the edge of life, a way in which human identity may be less like a stone and more like a current, captured and recast. To others, it is a cautionary tale about how the heart constructs the past to heal the present, how a family's need can make patterns cohere where a statistician would only see the haze of large numbers. What remains uncontested are the archival endpoints: a ship named Natoma Bay, a squadron named VC-81, a pilot named James M. Houston Jr., a death on March 3, 1945, and a chart showing Larson's plane flying beside Houston that day. Around these endpoints, a child's phrases orbit like moons, drawing tides of interpretation. In telling the story, we should be kind to the parents. Their son woke in terror. They did what any of us might do, looked for the source of the flame. In the looking, they found men who remembered a young pilot's last day, found the smell of oil and salt in the pages of a report, found that history is never called to the touch. If they believed they had solved the riddle of their son's pain, perhaps the proof they needed was not metaphysical, but transformative. We should be kind also to the skeptics. The mind is a ventriloquist. It speaks from corners we do not see. Given enough time and attention, ordinary information can accrete into a castle of specificity, and the drawbridge will look as if no one laid it there. Sirith's injunction to document early claims with independent timestamps and witnesses is not an act of hostility, but a gift to posterity, a way of telling future readers where the firm ground lies. And to the boy, we owe the courtesy of silence. We do not need his terror to validate our arguments. Whether one reads this case as evidence for survival or as a study in narrative healing, it leaves the same residue, a sharpened sense of the cost of war, and a tenderness for all the names that almost slipped the record. In a world so eager to forget, the persistence of a single proper noun may itself be a miracle. Natoma. It is enough to make even a skeptic raise a hand to the brim of a hat. James N. Houston Jr. is not restored by the telling of this story. He remains where he is, assigned to the deep. But his line on the action chart has been read again. The witnesses have formed a small procession in our time and stepped past the chart table and looked out, as he once did, over a grey, impossible sea. If there is such a thing as echo, then memory is its coastline, and sometimes a child wakes in the night to hear it. He cries out and someone comes running, and the world is briefly stitched together by a story that crosses from then to now. If that is reincarnation, it is tender and strange. If it is not, it is still tender and still strange. In the hush that follows, we leave the hangar and step into the evening. The sky above is the color of old film. A contrail unspools like a pale thread sewn through the blue. It wavers, fades, and is gone. But for a little while, if you know where to look, you can still see where it passed. The boy grew older, the dreams dimmed, yet the questions remained. Was James Leininger haunted by another man's memories, or by something deeper, stitched into the fabric of life itself? Perhaps memory is not ours to keep, only to pass through. You've been listening to Phantom Lure, where the line between history and haunting grows thin. If tonight's story stirred something in you, subscribe, like, and share this episode with those who still wonder. And as always, I remind you, every account we explore is grounded in documented research, but even truth wears veils from time to time. Question everything, especially what feels familiar. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and listen for what calls from the dark. This is Phantom Lure.